Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 719. My opponent kicked off here with e4 and I went for the Sicilian with c5. He played knight f3, I go d6 heading for the classical Sicilian, and he plays c3, the third choice here. And c3 actually on the previous move introduces the Alapin Sicilian. Yeah, c3, also the third choice on that move. But it's playable here as well. And it's kind of interesting. It's usually used to introduce the Kopek system. Let's back up. Knight f6. Okay, made the wrong move. Yeah. Oh, actually, it says bishop e2 is even more popular. Bishop e2 sets a little trap. I just wanted to point this out. Playing bishop e2 here. If you take the pawn, which seems like it's hanging, white has this check. And that gets a whole knight for the pawn. So it's not good to take the pawn, but well, you could go for a fianchetto setup here against that. What I've seen in practice, though, is the move bishop to d3, and this introduces the Kopek system. It's kind of a interesting line. Knight c6, and the bishop goes to c2. So white's wasted a little bit of time with this bishop maneuver. The bishop has to get out of the way so the pawn can come forward and contest the center. But these bishops are placed over here on the king side, on the queen side rather, looking towards your king side. And it has attacking potential similar to Ruy Lopez with those bishops there. So it's an interesting system. It doesn't seem to give an advantage to white. So I think if black knows how to play this, then it is okay for black. But, well, it does have interesting play. And it's a different setup your opponent might not be familiar with. So it's something to look at. Okay, but let's go back to the game. What my opponent played in the game was the move, how to go here. I went knight f6. That's right, he didn't move the bishop at all. He just played h3. This is another waiting move to see if I'm going to fall for that knight takes e4 trick. But I decided not to do that. And then he plays d3. He could still go bishop d3 here and get into the Kopek system, a move down, or having wasted one move on h3. But instead he goes for a closed Sicilian. So at this point we're just out of the opening book. Oh, by the way, this game was played on chess.com, and they put the times spent on each move in the PGN file you download from that site. I'm not sure if I like it or not, but well, I'll comment on the times as we go along. There's a couple interesting things I noticed from that. It's a little bit distracting having the times up there, I find, but anyway, that's what it is. So anyway, I go for the closed Sicilian here. Go for the fianchetto against the closed Sicilian. It's often a reasonable way to play since he's not putting that pawn on d4 right away. Maybe he's trying to put it there later, and in the meantime you can put this bishop out here and get some counter pressure along that diagonal. So a reasonable way to play. Bishop e3, and all this should be okay for both sides. Bishop e2, I castle, he goes knight bd2, I go queen c7. And notice one thing here is that queen c7 is a move that I spent a long time thinking about. So it's 34 seconds compared to some of the other moves which are made much more quickly. And queen c7, it turns out, is not the best move here according to the chess engine. It kind of thinks that this position is even, and I should probably play e5. That was its top choice, or go with b6 and bishop b7. That was its second choice. Queen c7 was on the list, but it was fourth or fifth choice, and it's just not as good. And I just thought it was interesting that when I paused to think, it's not necessarily improving the quality of the move. So I'll have another comment on that as coming up. So anyway, he castled. I went b6. He went a3 here. So he's playing very slowly here. This kind of gives back whatever advantage he had started to accumulate there after my queen c7. He could play d4 right here and open up the center. His pieces are well centralized. I'm not yet fully developed. That makes a reasonable impression to push forward with d4. Anyway, he played a3, and I pushed d5 right away. This was part of my idea of playing queen c7, was my queen and my knight were coordinating on the e5 square, so he can't play e5. The funny thing is he played e5 anyway, but he could continue with rook c1, and then I was planning to exchange. So say rook c1, d takes, and maybe bishop b7. He still can't push that pawn forward, and I suppose if it ever becomes a threat, I could always throw in e5 myself to stop it. But e5 always comes with the downside of blocking this bishop, so I've been reluctant to play that. Okay, but he went e5, and he made that move really quickly. So that's clearly an example of a move that was probably, he had already planned, oh, whenever black plays d5, I'll play e5, and he just played it without pausing to see if the circumstances really allowed for that move to be played. So I just won a pawn here, and I am a pawn up, and I stay a pawn up for the next few moves. This is all pretty logical play. I mean, he exchanged off the supporting pawn, so now my pawns are a bit fragile here, but I'm still a pawn up with good play. I should be able to hold them. He goes knight b3, and my next move is a blunder. And notice, so once again, I spent 37 seconds on this blunder, so I spent a long time, but I overlooked something. I was thinking about different ways to defend the pawn. The chess engine says I can't defend it, and I have to push it forward. And I was worried about the knight hopping into d4. I thought, well, this is making a great square for the knight. But in fact, the chess engine points out I have e5. I can chase it away immediately and actually start to build up some real momentum. So it thinks that not only am I a pawn up, but I've got a big center here, and I'm just winning. So I should not have been afraid of playing c5 to c4. You know, it's one of those things, you know, you look at that and you see the hole here, but you've got to look a little bit deeper and figure out how it's going to continue from there. So a little bit short-sighted calculation there. I just kind of rejected that move and started looking for other things, and I came up with knight d7 to defend the d pawn, but that leaves the e pawn hanging. And after this, it's pretty sad because not only did he get his pawn back, but my remaining pawns are weak. This guy is under fire and it's isolated, so it's pretty tough to hold this position. And pretty quickly, White gets an advantage. He gets that pawn too. So it goes from I go from being a pawn up to being a pawn down. Now the chess engine has a clever way to hold on to the material advantage. So I thought I would show that. Rook to b8. And, well, he can just trade off this bishop. I'm still holding on to the pawn. Say rook to b1, rook fb8, and knight to d2. Just reorganizing that. And I can take here. And what's this? Actually, I'm a pawn up in this position. But, well, the chess engine was rating this about even, so I guess there is counterplay for White here. Maybe White eventually picks up this pawn in some of those lines. But anyway, after c4, I'm worse. So he trades the bishop. That's right, trades off the bishop. I have to take back with the queen in this situation. And then he goes knight to a5, hitting my queen and hitting the pawn. And so that's where I go pawn down. And I went queen to c7. So there's a clever tactic here. So if you want to pause and see if you can spot the tactic. It's White's turn to move. Okay, pause the video if you want some time to think about it. I'm going to give the answer away now. He can just take that pawn. I guess I kind of gave it away that I'm losing that pawn. He can just take it right now. The thing is that his queen is looking at my knight, so if I take his knight, I lose my knight. So that would be simplest play. He defended his knight and attacked my pawn. So now he's got 2 pieces on it. And let's see. If I try, well, there were other moves here. I went knight e5, defending the pawn, but he goes bishop d4, and now he's getting that pawn as well. I went rook a to b8, going after this idea of getting some counter pressure on the b pawn, but it doesn't work. The chess engine once again comes up with a clever but kind of long-winded solution to this problem. Knight to d3. So, well, at first it looks good. You know, you've got this. outpost for the knight, but this pawn is going, so that outpost is not going to be supported. And he can take with the knight and defend that pawn. Well, the chess engine plays it like this. Queen takes, knight takes. And now bishop takes d4, trading off that bishop and creating a target here. So white's kept the extra pawn. Yeah, there's 4 to 4 here and 2 to 1 here. So white has an extra pawn, but his extra pawn is weak, and I can pile up on it. Well, see, first rook c8 to chase the knight away, knight e5, and now knight f4, with the idea of knight to e2 check and picking up the pawn that way. So anyway, there's various clever things that the computer comes up with to win that pawn back, but apparently I can get it one way or another, and it would be about even once again. But instead I went rook a to b8. Oh, well, it's a more natural way to play. But now he is keeping that pawn. He trades off my bishop, grabs here. Let's see. I retreat my bishop back. There were some more tricky moves here, but let's get on with the game. Let's see. He goes rook a to b1 now, defending this pawn so his knight won't be tied up. And let's see, I pile up on his knight. Oops, I brought the other rook in. Rook f to c8. He goes knight to e3. So things have settled down. He's got 2 extra pawns on the queen side, and I have 1 extra pawn on the king side. And it's a good advantage for white. But he kind of slips up in pressing the advantage. So let's go forward a little bit. I go e6. This was kind of a weak pawn on e7, and my queen was always kind of tied up defending it. And also it keeps his knight from hopping into these squares. So I think that's good. He goes rook f to d1, getting his rook on an open file. I lift my rook up to b7, defending along the 7th rank here against various invasions. Goes rook to d3, preparing to double. And see, I went h5 here. It's kind of a waiting move. You see, I spent a long time on that one, 1 minute and 1 second. I couldn't find anything better. This time, there doesn't seem to have been anything better, so that was an okay move. And then this move, he spent a long time on this move. He played rook b to d1. And that just seems to be a mistake. I mean, you can see what he was thinking. He's activating his rooks, and he's sacrificing a pawn to get rooks on the 7th rank, which is often a good trade-off. It just turns out that I can pick up that pawn and actually hold on in this position. So let's see, what could he have tried here? The chess engine recommends pushing the pawn forward to b3 and then just doing some kind of go slow approach. This does let me contest the d file, which I couldn't after he doubled rooks. And then he can bring his queen over to e4, activating his queen by hitting my rook. I can line up here. Cancel that. Oh, rook to d7, lining up this way. So anyway, this is white is a pawn up and black has activity. So that's probably the kind of situation he was trying to avoid. He was trying to be more active here. But, well, I grabbed the pawn. He brings his rook to the 7th rank. And now I really could just grab a second pawn here. The chess engine says that works out fine. In fact, this is also an interesting point that I was a little bit worried about my queen wandering so far away from the king side because he's going to take here and pile up. But my queen from this square on c6 can get back to f6 and hold everything. So if I had calculated a couple moves ahead, I might have noticed that it was safe for me to grab that pawn. And actually, a chess engine rates this position as better for black, although it appears that white is a little more active at the moment. Well, he's got this pawn over here, which maybe is kind of weak at this stage of the game. Anyway, I think that's interesting. It's probably close to even. Instead of taking the pawn, I just played queen c6. He grabbed down here. And I went rook to f8, defending on f7. He starts pushing his pawn forward, so I can't take the c pawn anymore. Let's see, I went queen to b6, offering a trade of queens. I just thought it would be easier to defend against these on-rushing pawns with the queens on the board, well, off the board. Chess engine wants to keep the queens on, play queen to e4. Both of these are in the range of about even. So even though it was, or slightly better for white, but not necessarily a winning advantage. So even though white has that extra pawn, 1, 2, 3, yeah, because he gave up a pawn here, but he grabbed the a pawn. So he stayed the pawn up, but his remaining pawns are isolated. and seems like it's just not enough for a win. And after the trade, I can hold this endgame. I should be able to hold this endgame. He played rook to d8 here, which kind of simplifies the job. Let's see, what's the engine recommending? The engine is recommending rook a7. I could go after the c pawn with rook c8. Let's see, you might start pushing this pawn forward, and then I could bring my bishop out. So I'm threatening to take the knight and grab this pawn. And this is also slightly better for white. I mean, it's a line where white continues to press, but but it seems like I can hold it. But after rook d8, it seems like it's a pretty straightforward draw. It lets me go after the a pawn directly. Let's see, he trades here. Plays rook d8 check, but my king comes out to e7, and he can't get back to defend this pawn with his rook. You know, he could have defended with the knight, although I can pile up with the bishop, so maybe that's futile. Oh, his rook is under attack. So moves his rook here, and I get the a pawn. And so should be fairly straightforward draw from here, but well, we'll see. It still gets complicated. Let's see, he goes c5. I went rook to c3. It was better, actually. And rook c3 was played quickly. So a couple of my mistakes have come from slow moves. This one seems to have come from a quick move. But I think king d7 is a better way to keep the edge here. I mean, he might go rook g8 to attack my bishop, but I can kind of unwind with a couple of checks. Check here to drive the king there. Check there to get my bishop out of trouble. And then say rook to c1 to go after the pawn. He can defend it. Let's see, he attacks this pawn first. I come back to defend the pawn. He goes rook c8. And, oh, the engine is recommending h4 now to weaken these kingside pawns further, trade off pair of pawns. So that seems to be the most accurate way to draw from that position. Rook c3, still drawing, just directly getting behind the pawn. He goes c6. And his idea of just continually pushing these pawns forward is actually getting him into trouble. He's starting to, he's going to lose that pawn at this point, and I didn't play the most accurate way. Once again, king to d6, just going after the pawn directly is good here. Bishop e7 is also good. Bishop e5 is also good. And then he goes g3. So both of us missed a tactic here, so this is your second chance. It's black's turn to move, and what's a good move for black? Okay, pause the video if you want time to think about it. I'm going to give the answer away. The answer is bishop takes. The pawn is overloaded. If he takes the bishop, I take the knight. So anyway, if he takes the bishop, I take the knight. So that was just a free pawn. That g3 move was a mistake. Also played very quickly. But he was in a little bit of trouble anyway. Well, let's see. I went rook c1 check. Yeah, I thought about that move for a little bit, 11 seconds, but I didn't notice the tactic. He goes king g2. And then I go king to d6. And by not playing that move and taking advantage of it when I had the chance, this is actually, once again, back to a draw because he can activate his rook now and trade, basically trades the c pawn for the h pawn. You know, I push these forward, he attacks. Push forward, he attacks this one, and this one can't go forward. So I go ahead and grab the c pawn, and he grabs the h pawn. And we're back to even territory. And here, let's go forward a bunch of moves. This is a long game. So we trade things off. He's trying to push his pawns forward. And I'm just keeping my king in front of the pawns and trading things off. And I'm setting up for a king and pawn endgame. And it's a little tricky when there's more than one pawn. There's fairly standard patterns if you're down to a single pawn. And we'll show one of them. So we're going to get to a common pattern. But when there's multiple pawns, you know, you've just got to play it out and keep in mind the various end games that you can get to. So you just want to be active with your pieces. The rook could also have been on the back rank and checking from behind. But you just generally will kind of want to harass your opponent as much as possible. I'm playing this defensively because my king got cut off. And so that does give white a slight edge here, and it gives him the right to play for an advantage. But this should still be a draw if played correctly, because eventually he has to push these pawns forward, and I can always trade them off. and then this is a draw. So the question is right here, what's the most accurate way to draw this? And I think immediately, I didn't hit on this idea at first, but I think what you need to do is clear the third rank so you can set up a third rank defense or a Philidor position with this rook and king. The king is already in the ideal spot. So really this pawn is just a hindrance, and you know, I was thinking I would keep this around for counterplay, but it's really just in the way, and I should immediately push that. And I don't know, there's not much he can do. This is one suggestion: as he tries to push right away, you bring the rook behind. As soon as this pawn advances to the third rank, the rook can shoot from behind and start checking the king. Let's see, he gets one more step forward, and if he tries to bring his king up to help that pawn queen, you have this check. So anyway, that's just not getting anywhere. That's a straightforward draw. So I played rook a1, and this is a little bit of an inaccuracy. Although it's still drawing, it's just making the draw more difficult. And at some point, right here, I play king to g8, and yeah, king to g8. So what I should have played was rook to f1, let him take that pawn, and then go rook to f7, bring the rook down, and oppose his rook, and this is drawing too. So that would have been okay. Instead, I went king to g8, and so see if you can find the best move for white here. Okay, pause the video if you want time to think about it. I'm going to give the answer away now. There is a mate in 3 here. So one little misstep. It was all drawn for 20 moves or so there, and then one little misstep, and this is just winning for white. The king only has one move, and then the pawn comes forward with check, and the king only has one move again, and then this check. If nothing else, it wins the rook in the corner, but there is something else. This is a checkmate. There's no escape for my king. So there's actually a mate in 3 with that king g8 move. And this is a lesson if you are the side that has the active rook and the extra pawn and you're pushing forward. You want to combine threats of advancing the pawn and queening with threats of checkmating with the pawn and the king. It's usually one threat by itself is often not enough to win, but sometimes by combining those threats you can achieve a win. So anyway, he missed that opportunity. He played king takes e5. He played that in 4 seconds, and now we're back on track. Let's see. I played rook over to a1, and realizing I needed to set up for the Philidor position here, he played king to f5. I play rook to a6, and so this is it. This is the Philidor position. The rook is on the third rank, and he can't advance his king to the third rank, which is what he would really like to do. Use his king to threaten to mate me by getting his king ahead of the pawn, and the pawn shelters the king from checks from behind. So he can't make progress until he pushes the pawn. I'm just going to fast forward here. And then once he pushes the pawn, as soon as this move happens, you have to shoot back with your rook, because if his king gets one more step forward, then he can start checking your king away and promote that pawn. So, but here, if his king comes forward one step, you have the check to drive the king back and start that process of just continually checking the king. He didn't try moving his king forward. He tried first checking, but now with his king back still on the fourth rank, call it from this point of view, pawn on the third rank, king on the fourth rank, my king can step forward, and so this doesn't accomplish anything, and the checks from behind can't be blocked except by the rook, and that leads to a drawn king and pawn endgame. So he played on a little bit, but pretty simple draw. So right here, the game was drawn. So it was kind of a fun game. Interesting back and forth. Hope you guys like this video. A little bit of an endgame lesson for you there. And I will see you next time. Bye.